The story behind this is a little silly. Basically, back in September of 2023, when I first built Snickerdoodle, I wanted to get her a small caboose that would match her small size. So, I ordered this logging caboose from Wiseman Model Services. It came in the same package as Snickerdoodle's bell, so I wasn't even done with Snickerdoodle when I started work on this new car. Wiseman offers 4 versions of this caboose. Half of them are vertical wall boards, while the other half have diagonal wall boards. But what I care about pointing out here is the other split. One variation comes with wheels and a frame, and the other doesn't, and assumes that you have a Bachmann passenger car truck to use as a replacement. It's cheaper to buy the version that requires you to supply the passenger truck, which is no surprise since Wiseman isn't supplying any of the wheels themselves, so it's lowering the costs on their end. Since I happened to have about 10 passenger cars, and I really only wanted 5, I decided to steal the trucks off one to use for this project. But that didn't work as well as I had hoped. The post on the passenger truck was so tall, it would have had to poke through the floor of the caboose to fit. Not to mention that the truck had material blocking the space for a coupler box to fit. I was able to finish this project mostly in a day, but because of the troubles with the passenger truck, I basically just put the project on a shelf and said, I'll finish it later, and later never came. At least, it didn't come in the way I expected it to. Recently, for a locomotive project, I ordered some parts through the Cumberland shops. I ordered a lot of bells and whistles, nothing much to write home about. However, Gary, who runs the Cumberland shops, likes throwing in extra detail parts in every order. It's kind of fun seeing what you'll get. Usually you'll get bells, whistles, headlights, or maybe details like air pumps, but this time, Gary sent me an entire tender. Now, I have some plans for that tender, and not for this video, but he also sent me a couple of extra car frames, including a 10-foot car frame. I didn't really know what to do with that at first, but then I remembered this little bobber caboose. And suddenly, this old project had a pretty easy solution sitting right in front of me. Now, this wasn't a perfect solution. The new frame that I got from the Cumberland shops was 10 scale feet, while the car was 8, so it wasn't exactly a perfect match. But hey, I'm no stranger to a little bit of scratch building. So, what wound up happening is most of this project got done within a day or two back in September 2023. It then sat on a shelf for all the way until December 27th, 2024, when I got the car frame, and suddenly, the whole project was done in a very anticlimactic way. Now, it's awesome that I've finally finished this project, but there's a bit of a problem that its age brings about. It's been over a year since I did most of this. I don't remember all the details and inner workings of this project. Writing the script for this was pretty hard because obviously my memory wasn't refreshed well, but also my recording style has changed drastically. Look at this camera angle, look at that newspaper, look at that wood glue on the bottom of a shot glass. But most importantly, look at how long the footage for this is. One of the things that I've learned in the last year or so of making videos is that small amounts of long recordings are way worse than large amounts of short recordings. With short recordings, you have nice, clean splits between each step, making it easier when writing a script to identify what each step was and in what order they were done. After all you need to do is open up a file, skip to the middle of the video, and see what's happening for about 5 seconds. With long recordings, while it's less work as I paint and build things since I don't have to stop and start the recording on occasion, I have to watch the entire recording while making the script to refresh my memory and identify the correct order of steps. Not to mention, when making the video, I have to splice the recording for each step. So, what does this mean? Well, first of all, I've improved as a YouTuber over the last year. Second off, this video might not cover everything in this project. I have deadlines to meet, and this is a headache to work with. I've done my best, and I do think it's good enough, but sorry if I missed any important steps in this project. With all that said, let's finish one of the oldest projects on this channel. This project began like any other wooden kit. Just a hobby knife on laser-cut wood, cutting through the small nubbins that hold all the pieces to the excess flash material. Once we had enough cut out, the first part to build was the interior frame. And these parts were pretty nicely made and had slots built in to help line up everything, including the roof braces and the floor. I was pretty new to the hobby at this point, so I was trying to take things a little bit slow, and I held off on adding the roof braces at first, instead opting to work on the car base. But, as you might know, the car base got kinda heavily changed in this project. Which is really quite a shame. I spent a lot of time working on this, adding the extra braces, testing it on the passenger truck, painting it a generic black, but, sunk cost fallacy. Use what works, and if what you have doesn't work, don't force yourself to use it. I then painted the door frames, window frame, and steps for the end of the car in a cranberry red color, and painted the roof in the same black as the frame. Next, I finally glued in the roof braces and got to work gluing on the main walls. I know even today, I sometimes drift a little too far to the side of the camera when I'm building things, but wow, with this camera angle, it's especially terrible. I won't mock myself too much in this video, but I have to throw a jab in here and there, To paint the card walls once the glue had dried a bit, I just used Ceramcoat Territorial Beige, one of my personal favorite wood colors, and dry brushed it everywhere that I could. In hindsight, I should have just used wood stain, but I'm not even sure if I knew what wood stain was at this point. The dry brushing worked out fine, but hey, maybe something I should consider in the future. I also painted the main pieces for the doors, and then started work on getting the doors and window frames in place. Now, the reason the car frame is in the center of the footage is because it was off to the side of my workspace. Why was the camera centered on the side of my workspace, you ask? Good question. My only answer to that is hindsight is a cruel beast. Instead, I'd like to ask, why was the car frame off to the side on this pile of wood? Simple. Car steps. Instead of being sane and using a stronger glue like super glue, I tried getting these in place with canopy glue, which is what I use for windows. In order to let the glue dry with the steps in the right position, I had to prop up the frame on a bit of scrap wood to get it at the right height. After double-digit failed attempts, this did work, but I forgot to check where the steps were actually supposed to go. You're supposed to trim them to the right height so that they don't clip into the rail. I didn't do that. I had to rip off both of these steps after the glue had dried instead. Fortunately, I was going to have to do this anyways when I replaced the car frame, but it didn't feel good when it first happened. Back to the doors for a second, I glued on the Z-shaped braces to both doors and then glued them in place, leaving one of them slightly ajar. And for the last thing of 2023, I glued on the car roof. Man, that sucked to edit. Now that I look at it though, I think it could be fun to build another one of these cars sometimes. I've been having a lot of nostalgia recently, comparing my older models to the newer ones that I've been doing recently, and this could be another fun point of reference. Kind of like how we built Peppermint in a night, while Snickerdoodle back in 2023 took an entire week to do. Let me know in the comments if you'd want to see something like that. Now to 2024. When I got that bonus car frame from Gary at the Cumberland Shops, it wasn't as easy as putting the old car body on the new frame. It was easy, but it wasn't that easy. As I mentioned before, the The car body was 8 scale feet long, while the new frame was 10 scale feet. All I needed to do to fix this was to add small bits of floor on the ends of the car, but I instead decided to build an entirely new floor for the car. For this, I took some random strip wood I had laying around and cut it to the width of the car, which was about 1 5/8 inches. Now, I'm not exactly sure how big these pieces of wood were, but I think they were 1/4 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch. This would make sense since 1/4 of an inch is 1 scale foot, and I wound up cutting 10 boards to cover the entire 10-foot frame. I've also worked with 1/4 by 1/16 strips of wood a lot, and this was definitely thicker than 1/16 of an inch. Anyways, I then glued the boards together in pairs, and then glued the pairs together to make the car deck. To make it look like the floor was covered in wood stain, I used wood stain. Specifically, one of my all-time favorites, Ceramcoat Maple. Once everything had a little time to dry, I superglued on the wood deck. Unfortunately, I did so slightly crooked, but honestly, if I didn't notice it while I was assembling the car, most people won't notice it in operation. I then glued the car body to the deck using a little bit of wood glue. As that dried, actually before I glued it in place, but thanks to the power of video magic, I touched up the paint on the car steps. I didn't remember the name of the color I used, but I remembered the bottle that I used. Now that I'm writing the script, though, I don't remember the color anymore because there are 2 bottles on my desk that both looked like they could have been the color I used. Whatever the color was, it was either Americana Deep Burgundy or Americana Cranberry Wine. After the paint had dried, and once we actually started gluing on the body of the car, I used a dab of superglue to hold the steps in place. Ironically, it didn't actually work all too well at first. For some reason, these steps just don't like being glued to things. It was pretty annoying because I had to hold the steps in place like 7 times. Fortunately, this time I did actually get the height of the steps right. Thank heavens I didn't have to fix that again. Next, I used a number 50 drill bit to drill some holes for the couplers and screwed on some KD 148s with a 256 screw. Since I had already added some 36-inch HO wheel sets before this point, the car was ready to run. However, there were some small details left that I needed to add, such as the stovepipe. Wiseman's kit did have one included, but I already used that on a Mount Blue Model Co. Caboose kit a while ago. So, since I happened to have a spare San Juan stovepipe left over from last week's Combine car project, I just stole that and drilled out a hole in the roof for it to go into. For the handbrake, all I did was stab the wood floor to open up a tiny divot, grab a spare Bachmann handbrake, and then glued it in place with, of course, super glue. And with that, the oldest channel project comes to a close. Right on time for the show, and a perfect fit for the little loop. I'd say my intuition a year and a half ago was right. This is an excellent caboose to pair with Snickerdoodle. It's a little comically small, but in a good way. I like this car. It feels good to finally put to rest one of the oldest projects on the channel. Maybe one day we'll finish all those old projects I never truly completed. Like, say, locomotive number 21. But for now, that day is not today, and I'm happy with the results we have. Thank you all for watching. Cheers, folks.